In today's episode of Everything Music, we're going to spotlight producer, engineer, mixer Brendan O'Brien, one of the greatest rock producers of all time. Brendan's production and mixing techniques are completely intertwined because he mixes all the records he produces. We're going to discuss both next on Everything Music. Okay, so you probably know of Brendan through his massive rock records that he's produced. He started out here in Atlanta, where I live. His first big record was the first Black Crowes record, which he was the engineer on. He later moved on to engineer Blood Sugar Sex Magik by the Chili Peppers, which has a very signature Brendan O'Brien sound. And then went on to produce virtually every Pearl Jam record of the 90s other than 10, every Stone Temple Pilots record, every Rage Against the Machine record other than the first one. Bands like King's X, Train, Bruce Springsteen, Incubus, Audioslave, Korn, Matthew Sweet. He also is a famous mixer of things that he didn't produce, like Super Unknown, one of the greatest sounding records of the 90s. Brendan mixed that. So today I want to listen to some of Brendan's work. I put together a little medley of mixes, and we're going to talk about the mixing ideas and how they feed into the production choices and the choices of sounds. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, I'm going to play a little medley here. These are all things that he produced and mixed.
This is just between us, but between over a night we all deserve to lose.
Okay, what did you notice during that? Well, one thing I can say is that Brendan loves piccolo snares because there's pretty much a piccolo snare in every one of them. Also, the pitch of the snare, I'm going to play it again. I want you to listen from mixed to mixed what the actual pitch of the snare is.
This is just between us, but between over a night we all deserve to lose.
Virtually identical in every song.
Okay, so I don't like you.
So as we're going from Pearl Jam to King's X to Train to Audioslave, Rage Against the Machine, we have the exact same pitched snare. It's obvious. Brendan's mixing style does not make use of samples in the way a typical mixing engineer would. Many mixing engineers use samples because they're not the ones that are doing the producing, and they use it as a way to control the low end and the ambience of the tracks and make them consistent, as well as making them able to mix a song in one day. That's really crucial to being a famous mixing engineer, whether you're Chris Lord-Alge or Andy Wallace or anyone. You have to be able to mix a song in a day, essentially. So using samples will help you have a consistent low end and have a consistent snare sound. Now, Brendan is doing this by the way that he's tracking them. The snare in all these cases is tuned in the range of a piccolo. What you're hearing is the room mics really compressed, and there is a close mic on the snare with reverb on it. But the main source of the drum sound are the room mics. I've worked at Southern Tracks, where Brendan did many of his records and mixed most of his records. I got to do a session there one time for about a month back in, I think it was the year 2000. I had gone in for a studio tour before that, and very few people got to work at Southern Tracks because Brendan pretty much had it rented out for years and years. That's where he did all his projects. There was only one room there. So I got really familiar with the gear by working there for a month, and I saw what they had there. And I knew back at that time from talking to the assistant engineer there that Brendan, for example, then one of the things he liked to use on the room mics was the Fatso. But, you know, Brendan had a 33609 there. He had his choice of everything, and he seems like the kind of guy that likes to use a lot of the same gear because his records have a signature sound to them. That room mic drum sound, which is an ode to Led Zeppelin and John Bonham, is really the core of his sound. When you go back and listen to all these different recordings that I just played you, the drum sound is extremely similar from song to song. The use of piccolo snare, because it really jumps out of the mix, and that was a signature thing of the 90s, having a piccolo. Every one of these songs that I played for you are different artists, and they have virtually the same snare sound. The thing you'll notice about the kick sound is that it does vary from sound to sound. Sometimes they're roomy kick sounds, sometimes they're close mic, tight kick sounds. It really depends stylistically on what he's going for. This is the mark of a producer versus a mixer. A mixer's not going to have these things unless they're presented with them. They're not going to have the same choice. They can put in a sample that has a room sound, but they can't put in a sample unless it was provided for them of the exact room. And it doesn't interact with the drums in the same way. Let's listen back again to these. And I want you to make note of the kick sound, if you can, from each different one. There's some roomy kicks, there's some tight kicks. That's a very roomy. You notice the heavier the production is, the tighter the kick sound. When the kick is really open, like in this Pearl Jam example here, you can hear the kick drum hitting the room mics, hitting that compressor and giving the kick that puffy sound, that roomy ambient sound. It's really a beautiful sound. All these things have gone to tape. Everything I've played to you was done in the 90s for the most part, and Brendan only recorded to tape in there. And that's another feature of this, of his production sound, that you have to put into the equation, is that all these tracks were done to tape. This Pearl Jam mix has a different ambience, and it's from the record before. This is from Versus, this song Dissonant. A tighter kick sound, similar snare sound, but a more in-your-face kick, much drier. It pushes the mix a little harder. This song, which is from King's X, Dogman, has a much tighter kick with a lot more top end, but it's got a tremendous amount of sub bass from the bass guitar. So he needs that tighter kick sound with a lot more top end, a lot more, 3K to 5K to make the kick cut through the mix. That record is a great example of some of Brendan's best work. The guitar sounds, the drum sounds, the bass sounds. It's absolutely huge. Phenomenal record. I would really recommend getting to listen to get an idea of Brendan's mixing and production style. The next song here, that's Vaseline by Stone Temple Pilots. Once again, a tighter kick sound. Super punchy kick, really punchy kick, tighter kick, not as much room sound again. More of a thump that hits you in the chest. So his kick drums really range they really vary a lot. He's not a guy that uses a kick drum sample. These are the real kick drums that are treated in different ways. Some are where the close mic is accentuated, some of them where the room mics are accentuated, some of them where the room mics are accentuated when the tracks are open, and then the room mics are brought back, or the kick in mic or kick out mic is brought up. A lot of times it's a combination of the two kicks. Is brought up in the mix forward during the heavier sections. Okay, let's dig a little deeper into one of these tracks. I'm going to pull up Vaseline, and let's check out the drum tracks here. So you'll notice is that that's a real snare drum. You can hear all the ghost notes. You can hear the inconsistencies in the snare hits. It's real. Second, the kick drum is real too. So let's go back and listen again. That's the room mics. It's actually room mics with the reverb combined. Let's check out the kick. This is the, I think, most interesting thing. Listen how punchy it is. There's definitely a kick out mic on that, but you can hear the attack from the kick in. That sounds to me like it's a kick in and kick out that's been blended. It's got a little bit of ambience on it too. But really hits like a ton of bricks. Here's the snare. You can hear there when it cycles around where I did the loop that the snare changes pitch. That's because it's a real snare. Okay, this is a typical Brendan O'Brien mic setup from what I saw when I was working at Southern Tracks. He would have a kick out mic. In this case right here I've got a D30 old AKG, which is kind of a Zeppelin kick drum mic. Inside the close mic is I've got an RE20, although Brendan would be known to use many different ones, apparently, from talking to his assistant who assisted me on the session. He and Nick Didia, I should point out that Nick Didia actually engineered all those records. One of the interesting aspects of Brendan's miking technique is his use of Y cable on the toms. I had Y cables like this built years ago by a company called Redco, I believe, where the split happens and the bottom XLR cable is out of phase with the top one. So it's purposely built that way. And this is kind of a feature of Brendan's tom sounds, is the miking of both sides of the toms. I'll show you that right now. Okay, if you look at the rack tom here, you can see the Sennheiser 421 on the top of the tom. I'll show it to you from this angle. And you can see the cable here comes down and it splits right down here. I'll show it to you. That is a Y cable. Now, the other side of it has a little piece of tape, and you can see on the underside of the tom is an SM57. That mic is out of phase with the top mic, so that XLR is wired out of phase so that when they are combined, they're perfectly in phase. We'll talk about that more in some of our recording videos, but that's kind of a signature of Brendan's tom sound. It's the same thing over here on the floor tom. Once again, I have the Y cables, which are built out of phase. I have the 421 on the top, and I have a 57 on the bottom here. It's hard to see, but it's right there, which is out of phase. Now, one of the reasons I took down the cymbals on this so that you guys could see it a little bit easier. One of the other things that they do is having a 57 and a small diaphragm condenser mic. In this case, this is an AKG 451 EB mic on the top of the snare. That's kind of a Bob Clearmountain thing that's been around forever, but Brendan does that on his snare. And then there's a 57 on the bottom of the snare mic. So that's once again double mic'd. Let's go back to the kick drum and talk about that. This combination of the kick out mic and the kick in mic gives it that real puffy sound, especially when going to tape. And if you route the two kick drums, the kick in and out together, and they're in phase, and blend them together, especially with a big AKG dynamic mic like that, you get a really, really fat kick drum sound. One of the beauties of having the double mic toms is that the two mics combine to one XLR cable and go to one mic pre. I like to use a Neve 1081 for my toms. So that single channel of the two mics combined, the 421 and the 57, go to one input, and you can EQ the two mics together. Now, the beauty of using the two mics is that the 421 has a great sound to it. And when you combine it with that 57 underneath, the two mics really self-EQ the tom, so you need very little EQ on it, much less than you would normally have if you just mic with a tom mic from the top. Normally when you're miking with a tom mic, you're going to dump out a lot of mid-range frequencies, 400 to 500 hertz or so. You're going to dump those out so the toms don't sound papery. But that double miking of it with the 57 on the bottom and the Sennheiser 421 on the top, it self-EQs the mic so that when you bring it into the 1081, for example, I have to use much less EQ than I normally would if I single mic. Now, just being able to mic a drum set like Brendan or Nick DiDia does not mean you can get their drum sound. You have to take into account factors like mic pre's, the room, and the room at Southern Tracks where they recorded a lot of these records was a very well-built George Osberger room that had an incredibly good acoustic sound, the live room did. So a lot of the sound that you're hearing is the room itself and those really compressed room mics that Brendan would use. But the close miking will get you some of the way there. There's no secrets to these things. These people have been doing this. The Y cable on toms is something that Brendan does that I haven't seen anyone else do. But most of the other techniques that he uses are pretty similar to most engineers. The sound that he gets is all about his ears. You can't steal someone's taste. And I need to keep telling people that. It's not just about the miking techniques, the EQs, all that. What he has is he has taste. He knows what sounds good and how to put the things together. The gain structures, the mix, the EQ of the drums, the tuning of the drums, that's all a personal thing, and that's something that needs to be developed. I'll actually be talking more about that in some future episodes. Let's check out the bass part from this STP track. I'm going to solo it. You can hear the real growl in it. You can totally hear that there's an amplifier being used there. There's probably a DI mixed in with it because you have a lot of top end information. You can also hear that there's a lot of fret buzz going on. Listen to it again. That also sounds like it's being played with the fingers. When bass players play with their fingers, that clacking of the strings against the frets will give you that kind of aggressive sound. If you think of John Entwistle, that's really kind of a signature sound of his, is that clacking against there. It gives a lot of top-end information, a lot of buzz to the sound, and it gives it a lot of character. Regarding Brendan's guitar sounds, you really can't generalize a lot about these. It depends from the artist to artist. Brendan gets great guitar sounds because Brendan is a great guitarist. I've seen him play cover gigs when I first moved to Atlanta back in the early 90s. He used to do once a year do a cover gig with a band, and he's a phenomenal guitar player. He knows guitar sounds. A lot of top end. Now, if I solo one side, you can hear that it sounds to me like it goes from a reverb sound with reverb, and then when it goes to the single note there on the bend, it goes to a dry sound. Listen to it. It's either that or that's a doubled guitar. It kind of actually sounds like a doubled guitar on each side, so it sounds like there's 4 guitars going on. Now, in Brendan's vocal production and in his mixing, he seems to come out of the old school, kind of Beatles school of production, where you have chorusing vocals in the choruses, meaning doubles. But he, a lot of times, will use single voices in the verses, as you can hear in this.
One time a thing occurred to me, what's real and what's for sale. Blew a kiss and tried to take it home. Isn't you, isn't me.
Room sound on the vocals, doubled.
Can't see, going blind, out of reach, somewhere in the Vaseline. 2 times and it has rendered
So
me punch.
the chorus vocals are hard panned with a room sound on them, and then when it comes back to the verse, it comes back to the center, to the single voice. Here's another example of Brendan's tracking. This is the Chili Peppers, Give It Away. Listen to the drums. Hear that piccolo snare? Hear the room reverb on it? Listen to the kick. Super compressed. Doesn't have as much low end as some of his later records. I want to say that I had read one time that he had recorded it with a 57. He recorded all the drum kit with 57s. I'm not sure that's true or not, but here's the room. And then here's the entire drum kit again. Now, check out the bass. Super compressed, number one. Very cleanly played. Played with the fingers. That's a great bass sound. Incredibly good bass sound. No variance in the sound. You can see if you're looking at the waveforms here. So here you go. You can see how flat top they are. You can see how they're square at the top. I'll reduce the track here so you can see a little better. They're pretty consistently. Okay, let's listen to the guitar parts. This is John Frusciante. Definitely a Strat. Either an actual room sound or a room reverb. Great sound. Vocals.
I realize I don't wanna be a miser, confined with
Super compressed.
A young blood is the level up, rise up. How come everybody wanna keep it like the Kaiser? Give it away, give it away, give it away now. Give it away, give it away, give it away now.
You can hear there was a punch in on the chorus.
Give it away, give it away now. Well, I can't tell if I'm a keeper nor a pauper. Greedy little fable in the sea of distress. Keep your more to read.
Vocals are super compressed. They never move out of this position. They were tracked that way. Really aggressive vocal sound, once again, I believe is a Shure SM7 mic. It has a lot of top end on it for something that was tracked to tape. But the aggressiveness of the vocal really comes through nicely in the track. There's also some additional percussion and keys that you might not have heard. Organ. Probably Brendan playing organ. Even though Rick Rubin produced this, Brendan was just the engineer. And that chromatic building sound is just basically playing in the low range of the organ and building it up so it creates a swell into the chorus. Just want to reiterate again, just because you use these techniques in your tracking or mixing doesn't mean you'll make anything sound like Brendan. Brendan's taste and his ears are what determine what the parts sound like and what the mixes sound like. But having the tools to do it will give you some insight in how to take these ideas and use them for your own. He would even tell you, I imagine, that he's just doing stuff that a lot of people do. But it's the way he puts the things together that really matters. That's all for now. Please subscribe here and at my Everything Music Facebook page if you haven't already. And please check us out on Patreon at the link provided below. I'm Rick Beato.